What's popping, people? What is popping? We are back. Thursday night, RBN Live. 4 streams in a row. We had a lot of great guests. I had a really fun time when I had a conversation with Ben Norton yesterday. Like, we got into a ton of foreign policy. You guys know I love doing these long foreign policy conversations. And we got another one. We're doing it again. We're doing it again, Carlos. We're doing it again. This time I'm joining my amazing friend, my academic friend, Carlos Gallego. Welcome back to RBN, my brother.
Thanks, Nick. Hello, everybody. How's it going? Hopefully everyone's back from work, relaxed, and ready to do some political engagement in the form of thinking and informed conversation and chats.
I hope you guys been enjoying this new time slot. I've been like things is crazy right now in life, so my schedule been changing a lot. But I think I'm sitting pretty at this like 8 to 9 p.m. Central time slot on RBN. You guys know CJ, he usually does a lot of good shows in the afternoon. So this is my new guest slot, and we can talk about some great stories. So if you guys did not check out the interview with Ben Norton yesterday, make sure you guys do that. But today, I want to bring Assal. She's gonna be joining us here in a few minutes. And Carlos is, of course, friend of the show, always with the great analysis. So that's why I had to bring Carlos aboard. But Assal will be joining us here soon. We're gonna talk about the impacts of sanctions and the global class war that the United States always waged, and why, as Marxists, as leftists, we must oppose that. That's the form of imperialism that should be the center point of our politics. Everything else is a waste of time. And that's why I've been covering all week at this time slot, Monday through Thursday. I'm going to do a call-in tomorrow, and then we play by ear. But you guys getting a lot of great content. So please like, share, subscribe. And also you can support the show on Patreon as well. But let's get started with this. Before we get a song in here, I have been warning you guys ever since we started Fred Hampton Leftists. I had a laser focus on the Black Congressional Caucus, especially as a young Black man in this fucking brutal capitalist empire, right? And we explained many times, you have people in our community that would stab us in the back, who would betray us, who they would choose to side with the colonizer as a way for their own emancipation. This is something that W.B. Du Bois wrote in great detail about. You have Fred Hampton speak about this, MLK, Malcolm X. Every Black revolutionary leader spoke about this, because this is something that must be opposed. And it's beyond me that people fall for it. The establishment learn if they can take people in marginalized communities. And the funny part is, a lot of these Black liberals, they're not really marginalized. They come from the capitalist class as well. But they take these people from the marginalized community, put them in a position of power where they can exploit the people that they are supposed to represent. And it works like a charm. And one of the things that piss liberals off the most is when I call out the corruption and absurdity of Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams, who was a Michael Bloomberg Democrat, and I am not exaggerating. I remember when Michael Bloomberg was running, she had events with him, helped fundraise with him, and she was like, yeah, I think Michael Bloomberg is a great option. And from there, it was obvious. I could have told you that before. As soon as you see the MSNBC prop her up, when you see the Democratic Party prop up any Black person in their party, danger. That is, you should be alerted at that moment in time when that happens. So I want to show you guys what she said. And this is why I oppose the Black Congressional Caucus. They are there to enable and apologize for the racist institutions that the liberal establishment builds. That's why you have Barack Obama, who became the leader. The Black Congressional Caucus all conjugated behind Barack Obama and large supporters of Obama while he led an insane drone program. He tanked Black wealth. The same way that you had Jim Clyburn, he leads a district that has the worst healthcare outcomes. Poverty is through the roof. The Black leaders are put in power to siphon wealth from our communities and work on behalf of the liberal class and capitalist class. Are we clear? And I'm gonna share this. I'm gonna get Assal in here as well. I see you there. I'm gonna put you in here. But look at this unhinged tweet by Stacey Abrams. And what have I been saying on this show, on my Twitter, on my platform? I have been explaining how the Democratic Party is the party of the police state. And despite this time where workers are struggling, gas prices are through the roof, there's a food shortage coming, a global food shortage that is coming. The message from the Democratic Party is to make and expand the police state more. If you're a class conscious, you understand that we have two right-wing parties that are waging class war on the people. Before I read the tweet, I'm going to get Carlos in here. And I'm going to introduce Assal. But Carlos, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I just want to reiterate some of your points that this is very much a common tactic to immediate. And we saw that with Chris Malls. I mean, the way Chris Malls was ignored up until the moment that he had that led that Amazon labor union victory, suddenly had Bernie Sanders, suddenly had AOC, suddenly had the attention of the establishment on him. And what people don't understand is that once the establishment has their eye on you, you're basically a target. Whether you're a soft target in the form of being assimilated or a hard target in the tradition of something like Fred Hampton. So what happens is that the best way to do it in our contemporary society, because eyes are everywhere, everyone has phones, everyone has cameras, it's easier to document that kind of violence, and it's harder to hide, and we see that with Assange and WikiLeaks and all the things that we are privy to after the fact, but nevertheless understand that our government is always in the process of doing, kind of recruiting people from the margins who elevate themselves in terms of their leadership, and people start to follow, and trying to bring them into the establishment by having them sell out is a common tactic, and people that actually buy into that and do sell out. And there's a choice that's made there. It's not accidental. There's a moment where you realize that, because people start calling you out, and that's how you know that you're selling out. And we can talk about how people responded to Stacey Abrams' tweet, because the thing that I want to just, I can't help myself as an English professor. I analyze the way the language is being used, and she's trying to be very careful in her use of language in that moment, in the sense that she's saying she wants to start by making it a working class issue, right? She wants to start about making it a living wage, they're not paid enough, etc. But my understanding, based on the tweets and what I've read, is that
not members of the working class. They are arm of the capitalist class. So they are not worker. They are not the proletariat. Sorry, Carlos, go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you look at the statistics nationally, you are absolutely right. But she's trying to frame it that way, right? So she wants the best of both worlds. She wants to be able to say that, law enforcement should be paid more. They're not paid enough, and that they should be held accountable. So she wants to be pro-police, but also pro-accountability and pro-working class by incorporating the law enforcement basically into the working class. And we all know that they're not, if anything. And I know there's a few cops, or several cops in several small towns that may not be making the money that cops like in Minneapolis do at a starting salary. But nevertheless, nationally, compared to teachers, nationally, you're absolutely right. They are middle class in terms of income. They're closer to middle class than anything working class. And in fact, they police the working class. So I don't want to go on a rant here, because I'm sure we're going to talk about this. But the problem is, and what Stacey is basically trying to do here, is have it both ways. And it comes across as hypocritical, and it comes across as incredibly soft in terms of a stance, outside of, I was the woman that was the face of the Democratic movement a couple of years ago, literally being on the cover of national magazines as the face of the Democratic Party, the new face of the Democratic Party, the new face of leadership. In my reading of it, basically trying to frame her as the female version, the woman version of someone like Barack Obama, someone that can bridge both sides, has the capacity to be electable in a state like Georgia, even with the politics that she represents. So that tweet, I think, is extremely revealing of what we can expect going down the road if she's already willing to start to have the working class. We don't pay frontline workers enough by using law enforcement as the example. I think it's very revealing and very telling.
Well said, my friend Carlos. I want to introduce my amazing guest. This is a friend of the show. It's been quite a while since we had Assal Rad on, but it's great to have you, especially considering the conversation that we're going to have here soon. But welcome to the show once again, Assal. Good to talk to you, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nice to be back and to chat, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the main topics we'll get on later is how the United States is using economics as a way to wage war on anyone who do not bow to U.S. hegemony. And Assal, she writes a lot of great pieces. One of my favorite foreign policy writers. So I'm gonna spotlight one of your most recent columns here soon. Before I move on, I want to do a quick chat check. You guys, as my brother CJ say all the time, JB and Savvy roasted my ass, didn't they? I don't know if you guys saw the JB and Savvy show earlier when they were doing their impressions. Damn, that was good. Make sure, if anything, watch the stream, the Savvy and JB show today, and watch the end. If anything, shit was funny. They got me good. Big shout out to my friend Nolly D. Love you, Nick. This is my good friend of the show. Big shout out. Ben Noren interview was great. Make sure you guys check that out. It was we did a conversation about Colombia, pretty much South American politics, because we got to Brazil as well. End all sanctions from NJ Anti-Imperialist Party. We definitely get to sanctions here very soon. Obama normalized neoliberalism. Yep, he was just another tool of the establishment that expanded the empire the same way Donald Trump expanded the empire from Obama. Now Joe Biden now doubling down on all Trump policies. That's just what we want you guys to understand here at RBN. We don't pick sides. It's a charade. Social CMA, keep learning. The educator must also be educated by the student. Dialectic learning. That's why I got Dr. Assal Rad here. I learned a lot from the people that you guys see on RBN all the time. I love the community that we are forming here as well. Just a few more chats here. To please get so much funds. You can't be class conscious unless you are fighting against the police state. We should pay pigs less and teachers more. Basic, right? The police is always reactionary less and until the working class governs by permanent revolution. So with that said, before we move on to the sanctions, let's get back to Stacey Abrams. I know Carlos has a lot to say about this as well. And I cover mostly state violence on my YouTube channel. That's why you also can check out the JB and Savvy show earlier, because that's kind of like the break where you guys can chill and have fun, where we're not talking about the kind of depressing things that we do on my nightly show. But we got to understand who the enemy is. And you had 70 Democratic mayors from the biggest cities that all pledged to increase the police more. You had Joe Biden that took COVID funds and used that to fund the police more. Now, this is what Stacey Abrams says. And then if Carlos or Saul, if you guys want to chime in at any time, just feel free to interrupt me while I'm doing the presentation. Stacey says law enforcement are often paid less than a living wage, and that is wrong. I looked this up before I went live. Minnesota police officers, for example, they get paid overtime as well, so they make 6 figures. I'm looking around my community, man. People are struggling to get a job that can pay a living wage. I had a friend that told me this sad story of his father worked at this factory, and that is the factory job that raised him and his family. He's just at that factory job after high school. He married young, raised my friend. Then he got that same factory job, and he was living in poverty. But the members of the capitalist class, the arm of the capitalist class, boo-hoo, we're not making enough money. Even though they make 6 figures. We got paid their class action lawsuits. We already went over what our taxpayer money pay for them. We pay for them to whoop our ass. Sorry, let me continue this tweet. We must raise the pay for officers and address violent crime as we work to build community trust and foster law enforcement accountability. law enforcement in urban, suburban, and rural areas across Georgia struggle with staffing shortage that put communities at risk. Higher officer pay will lead to better officer recruitment, better officer retention, better community interactions, and a safer Georgia. That is not true. That is not true. The police has doubled down on their violence since the George Floyd protests. Ever since then, the police has been killing 3 people per day. Now, I want to get you guys in here, but I saw this video just now, and I want to show you guys the class ramifications of this police state, this unhinged capitalist police state we live in. Let me show you guys my screen. I will give you guys reaction to this. One second here. Here we go.
Let me push the fucking thing, man. Don't tow it away on me. Cost me money. I don't have any money, dude.
Okay.
I'm broke, man. My life sucks.
I understand that.
You're making it worse.
Okay, I understand that, sir. But
no, you don't.
the vehicle is getting towed tonight, okay? So you need
God damn, you all fucking suck.
Okay.
You all fucking suck.
Okay. Are you done with that?
Bad.
I just have to write it.
You suck. You're not nice. You're not cordial. You don't give a fuck about people like. Let me.
Stacey Abrams don't want to give that guy money. She wanted to give money to the people that are imposing regressive fines and fees on the working class. So I want to pass it to Carlos, and I want to get to Assal in here as well. Do you guys want to add on before I continue?
No, I was just going to say that is essentially what we just saw is the logic of a police state, whether it is policing domestically or internationally. It is dehumanizing. It is incredibly unsympathetic to the consequences of its own policies. And we saw that person trying to negotiate and bargain. I can get rid of the truck. I can clear the problem without being penalized financially. I think that person wouldn't mind having a misdemeanor charge in exchange for not having to pay a fine, because economic sanctions of that individual, economic punishment of that individual in that form, fining them for something as trivial as having a car on the side of the road, is essentially how the police state funds its police state mentality, the fact that it can actually go into other countries and have the funds to send billions of dollars to places like Ukraine in order to keep promoting its policing agenda. So I'll just pass it off to Assal.
Yeah, do you want to add anything to Assal?
I mean, sort of looking at a video like that is always jarring, because it questions the sort of role of law enforcement within a society, right? If it's meant to be something that protects people, like, how are you protecting anybody with this action? If anything, you're taking someone who is a citizen of the country, a taxpayer, and you're undermining their ability to live. That doesn't seem like it. But the problem with the mentality of law enforcement is often this law and order kind of, there's no the bargaining that Carlos is talking about, the idea that you can actually talk to them like they're people. You should be able to, because theoretically they're people, but you can't. There's no way of talking to anybody. There's no way of negotiating anything, because it is this regimented, almost military-like belief that this is the rule, and the rule has to be imposed no matter what the circumstance. Of course, we could probably historically look at a lot of rules that we've had that were pointless, or that actually hurt people, or that abused human rights, or that did all sorts of things. And yet we always had that's the law enforcement mentality, is that no matter what it is, that's the rule. It has to be enforced. And that, I always think of things in a foreign policy framework, because that's my area. And because oftentimes, if you were to take the same situation that we have in the US, as the same type of statement, the same type of event, the same type of incident, and you contextualize it in a different place, then all of a sudden people think about it very differently. But that's so telling. It shouldn't be different because it happened in a different place. If it happened in the US, and often the discourse, when something that the population sees as negative does occur in the US, somehow we're compared to other countries, and as if to juxtapose, yeah, now we're acting like those bad countries, because we're not. We're great. But sometimes, you have these moments where we do things and now it looks like, and there's always a comparison to the Middle East, typically, right? That's the typical comparison. And that tells you something about the fact that we have an inconsistency in how we see things. But if you're looking at the role of law enforcement, if you look at any other country, if we had an adversarial state that the police regularly kill its citizens, that's what happens. Like, however you want to sort of twist that logic, the police in the US kill people on a daily basis. It is a daily occurrence. That in any other situation, like if we were talking about an adversarial state and I said, yes, on a daily basis, this government, its law enforcement arm, kills its, civilian citizens, there would be a totally different way of framing that conversation. But it's not, we don't apply the same logic to ourselves. And I just thought that was the interesting point for me looking at this. It always seems to be the sort of hypocrisy with which we deal with things.
That's
It's
why. Go ahead, Carlo.
I was going to say, and piggybacking on what Assal said, it's always authoritarianism when it happens in another country. When it happens in this country, it's just democracy and respecting law and order, essentially. And almost just to speak to the reason I think you put up the vid, Nick, is the fact that this is a great example of police essentially policing the working class into more poverty. And this person is not even working class. They're basically saying, I'm broke. I don't have anything, and this is going to financially hurt me. And the indifference is palpable. I mean, they don't care.
That's what I'm here to do, dude. Of course. He's like, all right, cry more. I'm here to bank rob you. I work for the state. I'm here to collect revenue for the state. I am not here to work for you. That's the level that police always show to us, the members of the working class. When I hear rich people talk about the police, I'm like, I don't know what you are talking about. I don't get it. We don't get it. When people say, oh, the police protect us, I never understood that. The police always gave us anxiety. And to add what Assal said, the reason why I look to foreign policy and the reason why you look at policing, because it exposes our liberal state hypocrisy. And this is why you see the vast majority, all but 4 African states, went and joined Zelensky in his last conference, because they are now like, we've seen the crimes of the United States. We are not on your side. You got leftist movements in South America that look to, and they're young. They grew up watching the United States overthrow their country, support fascist dictatorships in Colombia that execute protesters in the streets. So when you look at the foreign policy, that also exposes the black capitalist class, that also exposes the Stacey Abrams, the Barack Obamas, the Lloyd Austins. He's the new one. They got a black queer press secretary now to tell us why we should start World War III with Russia. You had John Lewis, and you had the Black Congressional Caucus that helped Barack Obama turn Libya to a slave state. You guys seeing the pattern here? You guys see how when any black face that they embrace, they welcome them to their team, because they know they're going to be the strongest proponent and successor of imperialism and capitalism, right? So I want to show you guys this. Because I actually want to get to Eric Adams. Because now you guys saw that cop pretty much imposing regressive fines and fees on that guy. Look at the waste of capitalism. I don't have to play the sound here, but look at capitalism is the most wasteful system and spiteful for no reason. So Eric Adams has been waging a historic war against the homeless in New York. There has been a lot of bad New York mayors, especially just in my lifetime. But Eric Adams is trying to speed run being the worst mayor of all time. And then not only do you expand the police state, you have the mainstream media that even attacking them and saying, yo, you increase the police budget, but crime is still up. You guys know how they defy crime, right? And now look, this is the purpose of Eric Adams expanding the police state. Guys, let me tell you guys this. Eric Adams and these neoliberals, the conservatives, the police state bootlickers, they don't give a fuck about ending crime. Do you guys really think they give a fuck about that? That's beyond absurd to think they do. They care about stuff like this. So Eric Adams has been confiscating the people's bikes, people's material goods, people's property when he do the homeless sweeps. There have been incidents because usually whenever police do these sweeps, they will at least notify, put warnings up. They will come, and even if people trying to move and leave, they've been caught on camera assaulting those people and stealing their stuff. The point is they want to instill fear in the populace through civil asset forfeiture and stealing people's property. And now look at here. How much in the video here was an event. You don't see it here, but Eric Adams, he hosted this event, and then he had like this big cheering campaign where he was like, let's go tear down the bikes. These are bikes that he stole from the working class guys.
He actually had he had a checkered flag. So he basically initiated it. It was a complete spectacle, and you're right. All I kept thinking when I saw that video, besides the spectacle and the fact that it's yet another way of policing the working class, as you just said, is the fact that all those bikes and ATVs that were destroyed that are now being used in urban centers, and I hear them here in Minneapolis, and people don't like them because they're loud, basically, essentially, that they could have been redistributed to other parts of the country even, or even auctioned off to other people in order to raise money and redistribute the funds. You don't need to make a spectacle out of the destruction of material goods that are still valuable and useful. They have a use value. They can still be used by other human beings for a purpose that is not necessarily joyriding in New York City. But instead of that, what does the police state choose to do? The exact same thing we just saw them do in the previous video, and what they do on a daily in terms of killing people. They destroy property and weaken the working class while protecting the property owning class. So again, same as always, basically, same story, but this time it was a spectacle. That's what he loves to do.
So I'm gonna read a tweet and I'll get you in there. So if you want to chime in on this part, let me pull the tweet up again just so I can properly cover this. Look, this is from CBS News. Nearly 100 dirt bikes and all-terrain vehicles confiscated by NYPD were bulldozed Tuesday in NYPD Brooklyn Borough. Mayor Eric Adams called the vehicles, which are illegal on the city streets, extremely dangerous. Not the cops that are beating the shit out of civilians, killing 3 people a day. The NYPD are fucking fascist thugs. That's not dangerous. These bikes. And as a Marxist, what I am telling you guys, capitalism is an insane, wasteful system. So let's grant you guys your insane ideology of imposing these regressive taxes and fees on the working class. Because when you steal the bike, you're stealing the property, you're stealing their wealth. And I'm showing this is one example. It's not just bikes, guys. When you see these homeless tent sweeps, they are stealing every property they see on the homeless properties, including taking the entire tents, taking people's bags. I've seen people they'll have phones taken away, they'll have electronics taken away, they'll have their blankets taken away. Everything will be taken away by the cops. So let me grant you insane capitalist this. Let me grant you this. Let's say these bikes are illegal. Why in your insane system are we destroying those bikes instead of giving those to poor people who need a way to travel? Why are we doing something that's more productive than destroying this stuff for what? A political show? Like, think about how you could use, and I don't even care about this argument that much, but I'm telling you guys how many different layers you can look at this. Not only are you wrong on the substance, even if you disagree with my solution that you shouldn't be doing this in the first place, shouldn't you at least be taking the bikes and giving it to the working class instead of destroying it? The same way police, when they steal money from criminals, do you think they're like, we got a drug bust, a cocaine bust, $100,000 cocaine bust. Is that money going to the community? No, a lot of time they fucking pocket it. So any last thoughts on this? And Look at Eric Adams. I'm going to get us all in here, but look at Eric Adams, Stacey Abrams. You have all these unhinged Black Democrats, which are dangerous. I can say that. This is why it's my job to call these people out, because you guys know how liberals bastardize identity politics, where anyone who will criticize Eric Adams, and Eric Adams already did this many times. Man, the media don't hate me because I'm Black, man. I'm the first Black mayor. He said this so many times. You can't hate Barack Obama. You're racist. Can't call out Lloyd Austin. You're racist. Saul, do you want to chime in?
I just thought the point about wastefulness is something that is enormous that we don't really quite like. We don't even know how much the amount that we waste is insane. And I'll give you one example that was in the news, and I'll just give you one personal example too. So if you remember, like last year, there was a story. This is during the pandemic when a lot of people are struggling, of police guarding dumpsters outside of like a Portland supermarket because they had thrown away a bunch of food because supermarkets have to follow certain rules. If it's like it hasn't been refrigerated long enough, if it hasn't done this, if it hasn't done that, they have to throw it away. They have to discard it for their own sort of like liability reasons, because this entire country is run by, a legal system that just wants to sue people. So you have them throwing away all this food, and imagine the situation you have to be in to go to a dumpster where food has been thrown away, and now you want to retrieve that food. So obviously, people are in a dire circumstance if that's what they're doing. What is the reaction? The police guard the dumpsters and don't allow people to take the food. And we do that all the time. And the amount of food waste that exists in this country is like a morally repugnant if you think about how much food we waste and the fact that we actually have. I mean,
because they don't want to drop the value of food. You guys know that's the reason why they do it. They destroy food because they don't want to drop the prices of food. Because if there's an abundance of food in the market, the price will go down. So a lot of times they in the pandemic, there's these farms were caught dumping milk, eggs. A lot of these food industry were caught destroying food. Why? Yeah. For prices. But go ahead, Saul.
I mean, you're destroying food when you also have stats that say, like an extraordinary number of American children don't get enough food. Where we have kids that go to school that don't have lunch money, right? This is the situation when it comes to food and hunger in the country, and yet we're wasting all of this food. So to Nick's point earlier, it's like, okay, maybe we don't have the solution, okay? We don't have a good solution right now in the next 2 minutes that we're going to present. But how about somebody thinks about a solution and you stop just throwing everything away, destroying bikes? Like, it doesn't make any sense. The problem is again, this mentality of maintaining a system that doesn't work just because we're always like, what's the alternative? Well, let's think of one, right? Let's question the fact that this is problematic to begin with. In medicine, the other thing that I experienced personally, it was something like just trying to understand how insanely wasteful are the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industries as well. Imagine I needed an eczema cream, right? Something for like dry skin, okay? My insurance didn't cover it. So it would have cost me $300 out of pocket for dry skin cream, $300. Something happened eventually. They gave me an alternative. The alternative gave me an allergic reaction, made everything worse. So now I have, for some reason, 2 large tubes of this medicine, one unopened. And what I tried to do is be like, well, I don't want to throw away $500, $600 worth of medicine. I clearly can't use it because I'm allergic to it. Call the pharmacy, call the doctor. There's nothing you can do. They're just like, there's nothing, discard it. I'm like, so you want me to throw, like, is there no system that works better than this? I'm telling you, I have a sealed, capped tube of medicine that would cost a regular person $300 if they don't have insurance. And you are telling me, throw it in the trash. And they're like, yeah. The amount that we waste, medicine, food, just anything you could possibly think of, when there are people who lack these things, is unconscionable.
And just to add to that, not only are they guarding the dumpsters, Assal, they're guarding them for a reason. Why? Because in this country we like to hide the fact that we have this waste problem, because as not only does it maintain economic value, it also it almost prohibits people from seeing the fact that there is an alternative to things like starvation and a hunger crisis, because there is food available and it can be redistributed. And the fact that objects, especially necessities, can be redistributed without engaging in a capitalist form of exchange is one of the biggest threats to capitalism, which is why they're constantly policing things like mutual aid. So there were a lot of videos during the pandemic of these kind of like guerrilla frontline service workers, like at places like Dunkin' Donuts, that wouldn't show their faces, but would show, because Dunkin' Donuts also requires workers to throw whatever donuts weren't sold that day in the trash. They would make these little bags of just donuts instead of throwing them away, and they were just finding people on the streets asleep, and just giving them bags of food, essentially whatever was in the bags, and that was redistribution. And when those employees were found out, they were naturally fired.
Yes. Have you ever seen the reaction of people who've been propagandized when you tell them that in this country no one should be hungry? They're like, "What?" I'm like, "Guys, do you have any idea how much food production there is and how much wealth there is?" And this is when people ask me, "Why am I anti-capitalist? Why am I a socialist?" Because I think we can do it better than them. I think if we control the means of food production, we could do it better than them. How is this a hard concept to understand? We will feed our people, which will increase the quality of life. How can you have a system that is built only for profit, which means what? Profit comes from what? Labor value and increased prices. So guess what's going to happen to food under a capitalist system? How is this hard concept for Americans to understand? Marxism as idea did not become one of the most popular political ideas of all time for no reason. Most people are not propagandized by our education system. So, Carlos, go ahead, and then I'll move on to the next part.
I was just going to say the scary thing is that we're now being disciplined and policed by Democratic politicians going on mainstream media and literally telling us to suck it up. They're starting to tell us to not complain, to suck it up. This is our war. I saw what you did with Max Boot. You know, it's not just Ukraine war. This is our war. So we all need to pitch in. It's the JFK. It's like not ask what your country can do for you. And it's like they created the consequences for these conditions of existence. They created the climate change disasters that people are living through right now. They created the conditions for these foreign conflicts that we're now engaged in. They are the ones that are engaging in sanctions. They're the ones picking fights, and yet we suffer the consequences. And what do they tell us now? Usually, I'm used to Republicans telling you to suck it up, get a job, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But when Democrats, and a lot of them are racial minorities, go on mainstream media and are starting to say the same thing, like shut up, suck it up. When I was your age, you'd read those kind of tweets. I had 3 jobs, and it's like, yeah, but things didn't cost as much as they did now, and you had probably insurance and stuff like that back in the day that has been privatized. You had access to the golden age of socialism, tiny mini-me socialism that this country lived through, that allowed people access to security nets, things like the Job Corps that would help them get a job, that would sustain them, allow them to buy a house, and you could be working class and own stuff. And that lasted like a decade, if that. So let's be honest. And it was only a specific demographic that got to enjoy it. Let's just say that too.
You remind me of this other video. I'm gonna play this video and then we'll get to Assal's article. But do you want to chime in, Assal?
I just wanted to add
go ahead.
to Carlos's point, because this idea, the sort of narrative of things were harder for us when we were younger is actually not true, because the middle class in the US has been on decline for decades. So no, it wasn't easier. Certain things in life may have been easier, like we have different technology, but in terms of a middle class America, what was conceptualized as the American dream, which no longer exists, that middle class has been declining for decades. So it is more difficult now to maintain a middle class existence than it was. That's just a fact.
And you want to hear what these brunch fucking liberals are saying? I'm glad more and more people are starting to get on my side. When I first hit the political scene, guys, a lot of people had a hard time with it. A lot of people had a hard time hearing the opinions of a working class black person who lives in the middle of a nowhere in America, right? And I used to tell these people, like, yeah, I got some beef with these Proud Boys, these Trump Republicans, right? But I'm telling you guys, these liberals, these New York liberals, these bourgeoisie liberals, their disdain for the working class, their disdain for black and brown people, is so strong. Now look at how they trained this person, this black person who they allowed in MSNBC. And I want to show you guys her unhinged take on inflation. And I want to get you guys' reaction because I really think the video speaks for itself. Let me get the audio playing. Now I want to get you guys' reaction on this.
Where we are right now?
You know, I'm just going to say this, and if I get banged for it, I don't care. There's a great deal of Americans where it is uncomfortable that they're spending more, but they are not going to go under. You know, you got to stop complaining when there's so many people who literally the inflation rate means they may only have 2 meals instead of 3. There are Americans who did extremely well in the last 2 years in the market. You still have your job. And yeah, it's costing you more for gas, but guess what? You're still going to take that holiday, that 4th of July vacation. You could still eat out. So I'm going to need you to calm down and back off because it feeds into this fear, and then this fear feeds into people making decisions that creates the very thing that they're fearful of.
Where we are right now?
I told you guys, we have 2 right-wing parties. It's just that you guys are feeding into fear. The fear of what? People becoming class conscious? And then she's like, will you guys back off? Who is she? Look at the side that she took in this tragedy. When you got people who are struggling, literally entering poverty. And I know people that eat 1 meal a day. That's just the reality of what it means to be American now. And her reaction is, will you guys back off? Will you guys back off? And now you guys know why she's on MSNBC. And now you guys see how they react when there's a Democrat in charge. Because they're tired of people criticizing their party. So they want you to back off. I saw you on mute, so do you want to chime in?
It's just that she contradicted her own argument. I think that's what bothered me the most about the statement.
It was so unhinged.
Why is the assumption? So in the statement, it's made clear that there are people who are struggling to have 3 meals a day. This is her own statement. So therefore, there are people who are so affected by inflation, food and gas prices, just an overall economy that is spiraling. There's clearly people who are affected by that in a very dramatic way. And there are people who are less affected by that. But why is the assumption that the people who are complaining either A, are the people who are less affected, or B, can't complain on behalf of the people who are affected? Like, I think it's frustrating because sometimes if you are saying something that is a political criticism, it doesn't have to be because it benefits me, right? Like for instance, if someone who is not Black talks about the fact that there's institutional racism in the country, maybe they're doing so because it's the moral thing to do, not because they're representing themselves. And so in the same way, someone can complain about the financial situation because it affects millions of people in the country, even if they're not the ones who are affected. If I can afford another tank of gas, despite the fact that it's so expensive, it doesn't mean I don't understand that my neighbor can't, and I should care. That's what a community is. That's what a society is. So I think the argument seems very odd to both basically contradict yourself, to say, yeah, no, I know this is happening, but don't complain that this is happening.
Carlos, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I was going to say that in addition to that, the reason why I think personally that it seems contradictory is because she's trying to talk to the working class, but her argument only works for a upper middle class. So essentially, she's talking to people like herself. People that will get the 4th of July off. That was a laughable.
You can still take vacations.
Exactly. I'm like, that's a laughable spectacle that comes from privilege, right? Because how many people do not get the 4th of? Who do you think's working the convenience store where you get gas from? Who do you think's at the McDonald's when you pull? I mean, these are the working class people that do not get the 4th of July off. State employees get the 4th of July off, and maybe some other private sectors give the 4th of July off, but not everyone gets that holiday off. So the fact that she picked the 4th of July, I know it's the one that's coming up, but she picks this patriotic holiday, right? And you're still going to enjoy it. So that enjoyment is basically neutralizes things like hunger and lack of shelter and lack of healthcare and all this financial economic pain. The spectacle that is the 4th of July and the fact that you will enjoy it neutralizes all of that. So you can't complain. And if you're eating 2 meals instead of 3, that's good for you in some kind of magical dietary way. I'm sure they could spin it that way. So my point is that if we combine everything that we've seen up to now, and I know they're videos, so they lend themselves to this, but I think they're all variations, and they might segue perhaps into some of what Assal is going to speak to, is the fact that what we're watching now is like a spectacle of politics where people are just saying things to say it, the way they did back in ancient times, just to like, bread and circuses is what they used to call it at times. You just have, Gladiator, the film, is based on this premise. If people are upset, distract them with something. And that's essentially what spectacle does. And one of the best things of spectacle for the landowning 1% wealthy class that runs the government, if they're not the actual politicians themselves, is to erase the existence of the proletariat. That's why she is able to say, you're still going to take the 4th of July off, because in these people's minds, those working class people that are actually at the McDonald's on that holiday, in order for families to get to the park and take their food with them so they can enjoy the fireworks, they don't exist. And so the spectacle erases the problem of poverty that continues to plague this nation, which still brags about its wealthy superpower status.
Well said. I want to put the super chat up. Thank you for the $5 X64, bro. The entire southeastern seaboard, with the exception of Florida, is still being paid $7.25 an hour, including Texas. But shut up and take it. That's part of the class war that the capitalist class is waging on workers. The fact that the minimum wage have increased in 15 years now. I keep like, as time go on, I'm like, damn, it's getting longer and longer since they increased that minimum wage. Now, like, the old fight for 15 is a joke. 15 not a living wage anymore. We need to start having a conversation about what we are really worth. Now, with that said, I want to transition to this topic, because I posed a poll not too long ago where I was asking people, because this was one of the internal conflicts I was having in my head, where it's like, is the financial result that we're living through because the ruling class trying to tank the economy on purpose? Or is this the natural result of late-stage capitalism? Because we all knew the economy was gonna crash in the first place. Like, there were signs of that even before COVID. Now they're using COVID as kind of like their shield. Like, oh no, capitalism isn't broken, even though we are seeing it fall apart with our eyes. And the ruling class is pretty much looting the treasury while everyone else suffers. Everyone else is suffering at the pump. Everyone else is suffering with food prices. There's reports of this massive famine that is oncoming because dum-dums in the Biden administration, dum-dums in the West, they want to starve the world because they want full spectrum dominance, and they want to defeat Russia, which I'm still waiting for a liberal to explain how this is going to happen in the context of what we're going through. We broke this down yesterday with Ben Norton, and this has been an ongoing theme. Russia was prepared, and a lot of morons and a lot of Washington, D.C. think tanks did not know how prepared Russia was for the sanctions, and they did not know the results that will have on the everyday working class people. Now, think about why they did this. They decided to completely destroy the economy so we can fight the fascist and authoritarian regime of Russia. While we are begging Saudi Arabia for oil now. And we are the number one allies of Israel, who have been using the Ukraine war as a shield to be even more unhinged and double down on their ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, bombing Syria, and they've been escalating and pushing for war with Iran. And the United States, and this has been a global strategy for years, is escalating conflict with Iran. One of Biden's number one campaign promises was to ease tensions and scale back on the insane foreign policy of Trumpism, but he took office and he doubled down on Trumpism. Now, Assal, she writes these amazing pieces breaking down foreign policy. And this was your last piece where you talk about why a U.S. war with Iran is a bad idea. You guys see, this is our great friend Assal Rad here. So I want to pass it to you, Assal, if you want to break down this article and why you decided to write it.
Well, I tried to make the title as simple as possible so people
Yeah, good
understand.
idea.
Like, it's just a really, really, really bad idea, and yet it is being pushed in such a serious way. And so part of the article was to say, you have a report that came out, I think, last week from Reuters that said Israel is pushing the U.S. to take the helm in military buildup against Iran. And this is similar. There are parallels to the situation with Iran and the situation we had with Iraq now nearly 20 years ago. You see very similar language in the buildup. And so, and then you had Benjamin Netanyahu in front of the U.S. Congress in 2002, basically supporting the Bush administration's push for invading Iraq. Now, what was the story? Oh, Iraq is bad. Saddam Hussein is bad. You forget the fact that the U.S. supported Saddam Hussein and armed him in the 1980s, but now he's bad. This was in the early 2000s. And of course, there was the fear, the elevated threat of WMDs. Now, there were no WMDs. So the U.S. commits a preemptive strike based on the fact that there's the threat of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There are no weapons, and they basically unleash just decades of violence that we see to this day. None of the things that the supposed analysts at the time who thought this is a great idea, mind you, there are the same people who are saying right now we shouldn't have a war with Iran, are the same people who said it 20 years ago, and those people were correct, right? That's become sort of the accepted national narrative in the U.S. Even the politicians who supported the war have basically come out and said, yeah, it was a huge blunder. The best one, of course, was George W. Bush and his unironic slip when he was talking about Ukraine, when he said something to the effect of, the wholly unjust and immoral invasion or illegally justified war by one man. And he said in Iraq, which he meant to say in Ukraine. Now, this is the best part. Bush corrects himself, says Ukraine, and then under his breath says Iraq too. So he knows it. I mean, the idea that we all know this, and yet you have a very similar, the threat of a nuclear Iran, which has apparently existed for decades. It goes back to like the 1980s.
There will always be a threat of a nuclear Iran. I'm gonna be 60 years old, and they're gonna be like the threat of a nuclear Iran. But go ahead, Assal.
Well, the most ridiculous part about it is that we have a solution, right? In the case of Iraq, I mean, the solution was don't go to war with Iraq. That made no sense at the time. But in the case of Iran, there's a very specific solution if your issue is actually nuclear weapons. Now, if that's just a facade that you're using, something that you're using to create fear, to create the threat so that you can justify an invasion, a bombing, a war, anything that you want to do, then yeah, I guess that doesn't help you to know that no, an alternative exists. We already had it. We already tried it. We know it works. This is also the best part of this particular situation. If you looked at before, so you have the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that is agreed to in the year 2015. Leading up to that, there was all sorts of criticism that said, well, you can't trust Iran. They're liars. It's in their DNA. They're deceptive. They're, just ridiculously racist tropes about the fact that apparently no Iranian has the capacity to tell the truth. But we got to experience the reality of the deal. And guess who abided by it? Iran. Guess who violated it? The US. And this is fact. This is fact. This is what has happened. This is the record. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Monitoring Group that belongs to the UN, they repeatedly gave reports showing that Iran was complying. Even the Trump administration certified the deal multiple times before they rescinded on it in 2018, which meant that Iran was complying. So we know that there is a solution. We know that Iran abided by it, at least in the past. And yet we're still pretending like there's nothing that can be done. And we're just on this collision course path. All of this, mind you, all of this is based on the idea, is a preemptive concept, right? It's based on the idea that we have decided that we know that Iran has made the political decision to weaponize and is on the path to doing so. none of which has actually occurred yet. So you have the situation that if you are my age and you experienced the buildup to the Iraq War, is a sort of insane deja vu to have to live through again. The fact that the countries are neighboring states whose name is different by one letter just makes it almost parody that we are dealing with the same situation, except it's not exactly the same because it would be much, much worse. And that's the part that is sort of like it's not that I expected the Biden administration to do all the things that I would particularly want, but this was actually a little bit shocking because this seemed very straightforward. Biden, to what Nick said, Biden came out multiple times, lambasted Trump's Iran policy, said everything about it was wrong, talked about the merits of the deal, was the vice president when the US signed that deal. And so it should have been a very easy sort of return, but here we are. Now, a year and a half into his administration, there's still, the US is still not even a party to the deal. That's one of the things that's the most interesting, that the US is the only party to have literally quit and left the deal. It is no longer a party within it. And he could have just returned symbolically for no other reason, just symbolically returned and left sanctions in place if he wanted to. He didn't even do that. So there really weren't any concrete steps taken by the Biden administration to try and restore this deal. And they blame the Trump administration, they blame Iran, they blame everybody but themselves for the current situation. And essentially the point of the article is to say, no, if Biden continues on the path that he's on, a war with Iran would be 100% a war of his own making. Because in fact, instead of blaming your predecessor, you're now the president. You know how Trump did everything with Iran? Executive orders. He made decisions. His administration made those decisions. Trump didn't pass anything through Congress that had to do with Iran. So everything that President Trump did, President Biden can now reverse in regards to that particular deal. The fact that it's not happening, I think, in the context of the Ukraine war is also the part that is both frustrating and sort of, it's almost unfathomable how you could possibly think that the world could afford another conflict in the Middle East, and that with a country that has a larger population than Iraq and Afghanistan combined, has a more powerful position than both of those states, in part because of US blunders in the Middle East. The reason why Iran has been able to basically, Iran capitalized on US mistakes in the Middle East, and that's part of what's helped it create a stronger position. This is a country with a massive bureaucracy, and the idea that we could simply create another war while we're already suffering through the consequences of a war in Ukraine, it just seems like there's no thinking. It's extremely short-sighted. I don't know how else to say it. I mean, if you think gas prices are bad now, remember the fact that I think something like 20% of the world's oil comes through the Persian Gulf, through the Strait of Hormuz, a very small strait that is next to a particular country that we were talking about, Iran. So if you think that things are bad now, they can become exponentially worse. Because the problem with wars is that they are not actually predictable in how far things will go, how bad things can possibly get. So it's a sort of Pandora's box that makes no sense to open, especially, and I cannot emphasize this enough, when we have an alternative. We have the alternative. So anything that happens, any decisions that are made are choices. Their hands are not tied by a nuclear bomb in Iran, right? Like there's all these things about breakout time. That's something important to clarify too, because you'll hear things like Iran now has enough fissile material for a nuclear warhead. It would take, if they made the decision, and this is the most important part, they have to decide that this is the path that they want to take. If they made the decision, it would still take 1 to 2 years for Iran to actually be able to have an operating weapon, right? So that the reason I emphasize that also is because the way that it's framed in the media and the way that it's talked about is if there's this imminent threat that is occurring, and that fear is meant to make us think that if we do take action, it's justified because, we're just a minute away from getting nuked by Iran, apparently, when we are not. So it's Yeah, that's essentially the point of the piece. It's a really, really bad idea. It would entrench the US in yet another forever war, when we've never ended any of the other ones, really. We've changed tactics in Afghanistan. I don't know if you look at what the Biden administration is doing in Afghanistan right now, the fact that more Afghans may die in after a 20-year war indicates what it even means when we talk about war. When we end wars, what does that mean? When you sanction countries, when you freeze their assets, when you steal their assets, when you starve their people, that is war. That is not short of war. That is not an alternative to war. That is war.
Yeah, that's exactly the argument that I keep making. Economic warfare is war. And this has been a strategy of the West, including Israel, to start this war with Iran. So isn't it funny they call Putin this unhinged tyrant that want to expand empire and start World War III, but it is our allies that have been acting insane, crazy. It is not exaggeration to say Israel has death squads that they send into Syria. They send death squad into Iran. Look at this headline here. And I'm gonna explain to you guys what this is. Iran orders U.S. to pay compensation for slain nuke scientists. So what Israel would do, they would send these death squads, these assassins, and they will kill Iranian scientists. They will assassinate government officials, and their excuse for this is, oh, they trying to stop a nuclear bomb. That's why they're going for scientists. They targeting Iranian nuclear scientists. So, and you guys see, you always see how the mainstream media had to cover for Israel, right? So it said that Tehran has blamed Israel for past slayings. Now they're like, no, they send death squad. They're doing the same thing in Syria, which exposes West hypocrisy. These are the hypocrisies of the West. Because look at the Ukraine war, right? Where they say, oh, the Ukrainians had the right to sovereignty. They had the right to fight their oppressor. Meanwhile, Israel is ethnically cleansing the Palestinian people, but then they call the Palestinians who fight back, they call them terrorists. And this is the funniest part, right? Because Russia claims it has the right to attack the Nazis that are assaulting ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine, which they have been doing since the start of the Civil War in 2014. That is the claim of Russia, that they have the right to inflict their sovereignty and protect the ethnic Russians from the terrorists. So Israel has been bombing northern Syria because they've been saying they've been claiming there's been violent militant Hezbollah fighters, Iran-backed militias in northern Syria. So they've been using this as an excuse to bomb and shell northern Syria, even though we know most of these bombs and shells have hit civilians. Israel and West don't give a fuck. They claim they find Hezbollah though. But isn't it funny? I'll pass right to you, Saul. Isn't it funny when they say, "Oh my God, Putin is this unhinged maniac for waging war against Nazis, flexing his sovereignty." But your allies, and this is not me making a claim in judgment either way, but your allies are doing the same thing. Israel is launching bombs in Syria with the claim that they are fighting an enemy of their state, the Iran-backed militias and Hezbollah. Did I get that correct? Assal, do you want to chime in with that?
Well, you used a phrase that I'm very used to hearing, and I wanted to comment on it. You said Iran-backed, and the reason why is because you see it all the time.
Yeah,
right?
That's the media language. Yeah,
it's Iran-backed, but we don't see the reverse. So when when the Israeli military murders a Palestinian American journalist, a citizen of the United States, it's not US-backed forces do such and such. When Saudi Arabia, carpet bombs Yemen for now nearly a decade, 7 years, going into 8 years, it's not US-backed whatever does. It's just everyone is independent as long as they're not somehow associated with Iran, and that's just part of the media language. The thing that I think is the most frustrating is that for me personally, when I criticize US officials for their hypocrisy, it's not because I don't believe in the international rules-based order. Conceptually, I do. It's just that it doesn't exist. So you're talking to me about something that is not real, and then getting mad when I say, but it's not real. I actually think it's a great idea. I think Iran should be held accountable to the same standard as the United States, as Russia, as Israel. Everybody should be held to the same account. They're just not. That's the reality. And the fact that we sort of, try to avoid that reality is part of the problem. So that's all anybody is saying. They're saying if you want to have a rules-based order, yeah, I don't think Russia should invade Ukraine. Of course, it's a terrible thing that's happening to Ukrainians. But did we have the same reaction when the United States invaded Iraq?
That's
No.
exactly my point. Saul, exactly my point. That's well said, because that's always my point when I make these points. But sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all. It's just the constant inconsistency, the constant hypocrisy is like the lengths that, I mean, there was a court decision, an appeals court decision, I think it was yesterday, that said that basically was against boycott, right? And it was based on these anti-BDS laws that exist in, I think, like 33 or 35 states in the US. And really, they're targeting Ben and Jerry's. They're targeting a private American company that makes ice cream for deciding that they're not going to sell their product in illegal settlements and what are internationally recognized as illegal settlements. But US courts are deciding that you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to exercise that as a right, as a company, as an individual. So you have to think about the lengths that we go to in this country to protect what is been called apartheid by the world's leading human rights organizations. The same ones that are cited, when they talk about adversarial states. So if you're going to cite Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International when they criticize and condemn human rights abuses in Iran, which they should, but then you ignore it when they do it in Israel, again, that is not a standard. That's not real. That has nothing, your policies have nothing to do with human rights. Your policies have nothing to do with international law. They're just not related. But the really flowery language that you get to use and assume everyone who's listening to you is too stupid to understand the amount of hypocrisy that they're inundated with.
Carlos, you want to chime in?
I just wanted to, there's a lot of things to respond to. One thing that I just wanted to ask Assal theoretically, because I think the title of your piece is very succinct and it gets obviously directly to the point. It's a very bad idea for most of us, right, who are thinking rationally, who believe in the idealism, if you will, underlying some of these international treaties that we have that should be binding for all nations. Who does it, Ben? Who is it a good idea for? If it's not a good idea for us, then if people are pushing it, my question would be, who is it a good idea for? Because you say that you're having this kind of recollections of the Iraq war, and understandably so, and the way that we invaded Iraq, and we had two fronts at that time. We were in Iraq, we were in Afghanistan. We almost were looking for reasons to keep expanding the fronts. To me, it seems like the Democrats have borrowed that neocon page and playbook and are doing something similar. And something that people don't talk about in terms of warfare, I agree completely. Sanctions are an ancient war strategy. This is how you starve your enemy. This is how you deny them medical care, reinforcements. If you can't directly confront them, you cut off the supply chain. And essentially, sanctions are a form of warfare. And we tend to, as Nick rightfully said, in this country, we tend to frame the enemy as irrational, as monstrous, and we tend to frame the heroes as obviously heroic, as the good guys, as rational. And I agree that these are completely irrational decisions. And before I pass that on, that kind of rhetorical question to you of who does this benefit, let's not forget also that we engaged, I think we're the first nation state to engage in cyber warfare with another nation, and that was against Iran when under the Israeli-backed U.S. Stuxnet virus, we basically compromised Iran's nuclear uranium enrichment capabilities, and essentially they didn't know why the mechanical part of their uranium enrichment labs were not working, because they never thought that the mechanical was tied to the computer, was tied to a virus that a nation state paid millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars for, in order to engage in what could be the very first act of cyber warfare. So.
Well, so first you said something about starving people and as a tactic of warfare, and it's so funny that you said that because what is it? Liz Truss, the I think Foreign Secretary of the UK, tweeted something earlier today saying basically that food should never be used as a weapon of war. This while the UK sold arms to Saudi Arabia as it was starving Yemenis, and Yemenis continue to starve. Also through a US backed, since we like to use this language, a US backed Saudi blockade. So we don't have a problem starving people in war. We just don't. I mean, again, these things are said constantly. It's a great statement. I agree. The thing is I agree. Food should not be used as a weapon of war, but the West uses it as a weapon of war all the time. So that's, this is where it becomes like a problematic statement. Now, in terms of, who is it a good idea for a war with Iran? That is actually an excellent point, because sometimes when I say it's a bad idea, I mean for ordinary people. I mean for ordinary people in Iran. I mean especially Iran, which if it actually falls into a war, if we are looking at anything that's happened in its region, right? Any country in the region that has been mired in war for years, the people are not better off. The people are not doing well. So first, it's terrible for them. It's bad for the U.S. It's because, again, we're entrenching ourselves in another forever war where we're using what the war in Afghanistan cost over $2 trillion. So more trillions of dollars when 40 million Americans live in poverty, but we have trillions of dollars to use on fruitless wars when we have peaceful alternatives. So you have how it will affect many, many people, how it can affect many, many people. Imagine the amount of refugees we currently have, the fact that we have a refugee crisis basically in the world. Now take a country that has over 80 million people, put it in a war, and now you have millions of more refugees. So yeah, I mean, it's a bad idea for a lot of reasons, but for some people it's a good idea. That's why they push it. And so when you look at that number, $2 trillion in Afghanistan alone, trillions of dollars on, I think something like $8 trillion on the war on terror. People are making a lot of money. I mean, so there's different actors. There's different actors and different reasons why they think like such a war would be beneficial. One, you have simply the monetary benefit of, when you make war for profit, when you have private companies that make weapons, and how do they profit then? If I'm a company that makes bananas, I profit when people eat bananas. If I'm a company that makes weapons, I profit when people buy weapons. So there's that, which I think people, refer to as the military industrial complex. So you have that kind of spending. Then you also have regional partners of the US. You have allies of the US, say a country like Israel or a country like Saudi Arabia, who are regional rivals with Iran. So you have this idea that if you actually wanted to have a sort of peaceful coexistence in that region or just anywhere in the globe, it's hard to do so when you expect your friend, your ally, to have a military advantage. And that's what we want. That's what the US wants. The US wants, in fact, it's like part of US standard policy. Israel must have, that's why even other US allies will not get the same weapons that Israel does, right? Other US allies don't have nuclear weapons. Israel has nuclear weapons. They must have, according to US policy, a military edge. Well, when you create that, you make everybody else in the region insecure, right? That's just like a normal thing. If there was if Europe decided that Mexico has to have a military edge over the US, we would think it's a little weird. Why would that have to happen? So the idea is also that there are regional partners that want to maintain their edge within the region and don't want to see any kind of detente between the US and Iran, because that would potentially cost that balance, basically, or that imbalance, I should say. And a simple example of that is if for people who are so scared of Iran having a nuclear weapon, right? Well, there's actually only one country in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons. That's the state of Israel. The US and Israel itself doesn't acknowledge it. But beyond that, Iran supports the idea of making the Middle East a nuclear-free zone, as does basically everybody. But guess who doesn't? Guess who doesn't support that idea? Israel. So if you actually believe, if you're actually fearful of nuclear proliferation, then why not agree to something where nobody has nuclear weapons? Because you have to maintain your edge. And that in like a geopolitical system, that is not, again, that's not a rules-based order. That's an imperial-based order. That's empire. That's I have to have my edge because I am part of this like hegemonic empire, and so I cannot allow not people being on equal footing to actually prevent prevent other conflicts from arising. So there's different, there's different interests that have different reasons why a war would, because it wouldn't necessarily, they don't see it as hurting them. There's also an ideological reason, though, and I think that's important to mention, because even if you look at the state of Israel, Israel is not a monolith, just like no country is a monolith, right? In the Israeli security and defense community, you've had multiple people come out and say, yeah, we should return to the deal. Iran should return to the deal. The US should return to the deal, because the deal, any deal, is better than no deal. These are officials within Israel saying these things. So how does it happen? Because you also have these ideological views that we often sort of attach to states like Iran. We look at Iran from a Western point of view, and often it's talked about as if it's a fanatic state, and yet our own policies are, if not equally, more fanatic. The fact that we have unconditional aid to Israel is a fanatic stance. Anything that's unconditional is fanatic, right? It is an extreme point of view to say that under any circumstance, no matter what is happening, we're still going to give those funds. That's just by its very nature a fanatic point of view to have. And you also have in Israel, you have a far right religious movement that has taken a hold of much of the country there as well. And so it depends on who you're talking to in these countries, who is actually in power, and how they think they will benefit from a conflict. But there's no, at the very least, right? If it's hard to predict the future, which it is, you can't predict it. We can look at the past. And if we look at the past 2 decades, at the very least, everybody should be able to agree on the simple fact that US militarism has failed. And the most important example of that is the fact that it took the Taliban days to take over the entire state of Afghanistan. In fact, the Taliban has a more stable position right now than it did 20 years ago. So that's a failure. That is an utter failure. And this administration and previous administrations, and anyone can try and twist it however they want, it is a failure, because that's not actually what we went to do. We didn't go to help Afghans. We went to line the pockets of, the military industrial complex. $2 trillion went somewhere, and it didn't go to the Afghan people.
Well, I'm glad he brought that up, because I wanted to mention Afghanistan before we wrap up. You guys see why I miss having Assal on the program. I love to bring her on to discuss Iran and foreign policy in general. Make sure you guys check out her article. This is I put it in the comments. I need edit in the description, but this is Assal. Make sure you guys subscribe to her as well and check out her work. I want to share the Afghanistan tragedy before we sign off today. I know we went a little bit long, but there's always so much great stuff to discuss. But this will be our last quick segment, and before I give you guys last thoughts. Unfortunately, the people of Afghanistan cannot catch a break, so they had a giant earthquake. And I saw this number. It's like one of the numbers you're like, what? How is that? How is this real? 1,000 people killed. I remember in my high school, we had 1,000 people in my school. I don't know how big is that, guys. I don't know how big that is, but we wasn't like a giant high school, but we wasn't small, right? There was about 200 people in my class, so I guess under 1,000, just barely under 1,000, I would guess, in my high school. Imagine if everyone in my high school just died. Like, can you guys imagine that? Like, that's a comparable number, right? All the teachers, all the students just died. That's the kind of radical empathy I have. Like, this is horrific to read. 1,500 injured. And you look here, Afghanistan earthquake, no food, no shelter, fears of cholera. And You want to know who had the audacity to say something about this? Our favorite punching bag, Assal, Anthony Blinken. He said the earthquake in Afghanistan is a great tragedy, adding to an already dire humanitarian situation. We grieve for all the lives lost and the hardships of Afghans. Blah 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 blah. The obvious response to this, right, is maybe you guys should release the funds and stop starving Afghan people. Millions of Afghans are going hungry. There, one estimate I read. Now, to be fair, this was a few weeks ago. One estimate I read said there's like 23 million Afghans are have the risk of starvation because Biden is withholding billions in Afghan funds. And what unhinged liberals and neocons would say, they would say, well, he holding the funds because he don't want to empower the Taliban. Guys, please stop listening to U.S. media and their unhinged reporters and talk to the people on the ground. There have been reports of everyday business people who had their money tied in the Iranian banking system, who now they don't have access to their funds. Everyday Afghan people have struggled with this. There are 13,000 infants in Afghanistan that starved to death because their mothers couldn't feed themselves enough to produce breast milk. And don't mention formula in the sanctioned Afghanistan. The same with Yemen. That's how infants died in insane rates in Yemen. And that's why I wanted to at least mention that, because it's a horrific tragedy. The last headline I'm gonna read, I'll give you guys last thoughts and I'll get you guys out of here. Always fun having these conversations. But this last headline I want to read, because this is seeds warfare. I love the explanation that Carlos gave. They used to call this seeds warfare, economic warfare. Now they came up with a new word that confuses people. We put sanctions on this country. Ooh, that sounds sexy, right? That's what people think. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I don't know what people think that makes this shit okay. But I'm glad people are starting to call this out on a global scale. Russia, China, Africa, a lot of leftist leaders in the global south who they want to form unity so they can resist this economic war that America has been waging against workers and against anyone who did not bow to their capitalist full spectrum dominance. So this last headline I read, and I'll give you guys last thoughts, right? So China calling out the U.S. for their barbaric use of sanctions with no regard for the world economy. We are ruled by psychopaths who are willing to destroy everything just for full spectrum dominance. That's why I tweeted. Now, this is the headline. Western sanctions are weaponizing world economy. This head of China says at their summit. So you got the entire non-West, right? Our media always trying to pretend there's a united global community against Russia. No, there's not. We're talking about billions of people. When we look at China, when we look at India, when we look at Africa, what are you guys talking about? The Western chauvinists? I don't get it. So hopefully you guys understand the harmful impacts of sanctions. And I want to pass it to, let's go Carlos first, and then Assal this time. There'll also be last words because I want to get you guys out of here as well. I appreciate this great conversation. Carlos, any final thoughts you want to send us off before we leave today?
Sure. I just want to say that I'm glad you brought up the humanitarian side effects of the earthquake, because they just cite the injuries and the deaths, but there's going to be thousands, if not tens of thousands of people that are going to be displaced as a consequence of this. And that humanitarian crisis, as you well stated, Nick, is going to be very much connected to the basic what I would call war crimes that we committed in Afghanistan and are still committing by freezing those funds because they were given to and promised. But I actually wanted to end not with a statement, but with another question, if Assal doesn't mind, because I think the United States did an excellent job the first time, right? With Gulf War I, George Bush Sr., I can't believe we talk this way in the United States. It's like a monarchy. When George Bush Sr. Was in power, he established a worldwide coalition, right? And it isolated Iraq ideologically, geopolitically. It made it very difficult for anyone to have Iraq's back at that time. And so the punishment, the discipline that followed, they didn't invade Iraq the way that they did the second time, but they went in there and basically destabilized the country. The second time it was a complete invasion, occupation. They expanded to Afghanistan, etc. And I think Nick is right. I think that what we're witnessing right now with the war in Ukraine is that people are not necessarily in favor of what Russia is doing, but they're listening to the reasons why Russia is feeling, as you said earlier about nations in the Middle East, insecure, a little nervous about what the West is doing, or in the case of the Middle East, what Israel is doing. It makes the region a little more insecure, nervous, if you will. So right now, as Nick just quoted, other countries, whether they are previously colonized nations that are now rising up and speaking against imperialism, or whether they're current nations like China that have UN Security Council type status as a nation, are coming out and critiquing the hypocrisy of the United States. What countries do you think, because I don't see Iran as being alone politically and geopolitically the way that they want to isolate Iraq and Afghanistan. So to me, it seems like if we did pick a fight with Iran, it would not only be whatever nations we rally around that coalition. Iran, I think, would have access to other nation states that would take Iran's side. But please correct me if you think I'm wrong on that.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think you're wrong. I think, again, I tend not to like to make predictions because it's, I don't think it serves that much of a purpose besides because everybody will sort of create the scenario that they think will take place. But to your point, I mean, we can draw logical conclusions. Under the Trump administration, if anything, the sort of attitude towards Iran in the US was reversed. And this is something that Biden said. Joe Biden, as a candidate, criticized Trump for this very point, to say that, it wasn't Iran that walked away from the deal. It was Trump. And the US has become a pariah. The US has basically lost all credibility on the international stage. And in fact, he ran on this idea and continues to use that sort of platform in his administration that, remember, America is back. Anyways. So that concept was obviously not about America had gone anywhere. We continue to be the hegemon of the world. I mean, Trump was just using the same levers of power to exert pressure wherever he wanted to, essentially. But he didn't use the right rhetoric, right? He didn't use the right language to say it. When you starve people, you can't say you're starving them. You have to say that you're helping them. And that's really all he did that made people, in terms of his foreign policy, that made people so angry. He didn't follow the sort of decorum that we are more accustomed to. But what the Biden admin has done is, at least in the West, they've brought that back. Right? They've brought that sort of coalition that you're talking about. Now the tables have turned again, and now everything is Iran's fault. Everything was America's fault, and now everything is Iran's fault. And that was the absolute intention of the administration, right? Because if they sort of knew that they were never going to prioritize returning to the deal, then they had to change the framing of the conversation to stop blaming the US, or at least to stop blaming. So if Biden's not to blame, then the US isn't to blame, except for the fact that Trump was the president of what country? The United States. So the idea that the US is not to blame because it was the previous president who did it makes no sense. But I would say that they have been much more successful at creating that coalition in the West. Not so much so in these other countries that you see, especially China and Russia, who are also part of the deal, and have really advocated for the idea that the US should return to the deal, that the US and Iran should both return to compliance within the deal. Of course, Iran is still in the deal. So the US would literally have to return and then return to compliance. It's not in the deal. But I do think that we're looking at, and that's why the point that I'm trying to make in the article is precisely that. This is not 2003, right? We do not exist in 2003. The context that we are in, especially because of the war in Ukraine, is wildly different. And the idea that you would think that we could get some kind of coalition to now go to war with Iran doesn't really make sense, because then why aren't we doing that with Russia? We're not, because we don't want to get to the point of escalating with Russia, because that's not what anybody wants. They know that it benefits no one to do so. So what is the alternative? The alternative is not sacrifice Ukraine. That's not an alternative. The alternative is you have to figure out a peaceful path that requires concessions from both sides. But if you refuse to concede anything, if anything, if you're doubling down, you're expanding, then you're accelerating the process of these sort of like conflicts and wars. And of course, that's what we saw in the Cold War. But this is the interesting thing in the Cold War comparison, is in the Cold War comparison, the idea was an ideological dispute, right? The Soviet Union was communist, the US is capitalist, we were against them, communism is bad, that was the whole thing. Russia is no longer communist. I don't even know how to say this. They're oligarchs. It's a capitalist system.
No, please tell liberals that Russia is not a USSR no more. Please, someone, please. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's such an important point, right? That the fact that it's paralleled with the Cold War, except the entire justification of the Cold War was we were fighting against communism. That was the justification. That's not the correct justification now. So it's always, again, it has to be spun in a way to make it make sense. And the reality of it is the US is an empire on decline. There's just no other way of looking at it. The US now, decline can take a very long time. Decline, if you've studied history at all, there are empires that have lasted many more centuries than the US has been around. So decline can take a long time, but that's the situation that we find ourselves in. And so you have this sort of old world order that's still the mentality of the people who are in office, probably because they were born during the old world. That's the only way I can think about it too. And it's not addressing any of the issues that actually will affect current young generations and generations to come, right? The fact that, I tweeted this today, I think Biden asked for unprecedented $813 billion military budget, which apparently was not enough. So you had the House Foreign Affairs Committee actually wanting to add, I heard one number that was 37 billion, another that was 45 billion. We've given 54 billion to Ukraine in less than 4 months. We give Israel nearly $4 billion in military aid every year. So that's over $900 billion being spent on war. The climate crisis budget is 44 billion. It's less than 5%. That should tell you everything about the priorities. This, as not surprisingly, more record-breaking heat waves. You have heat waves across the country, and people who are vulnerable, if you're homeless, if you live in an area where you don't have, proper ventilation, air conditioning, any of these things, these are luxuries for a lot of people. So none of that is being addressed, and we're still in like the 1960s thinking about how we're going to take down the Soviet Union. It's just unbelievable that that's the state that we find ourselves in, and that also explains why this is a wildly unpopular administration, and why people are as angry as they are. And I'll tell you that the US is not unique. Any country, any population of any country, their number one concern will always be the state of the economy. And that doesn't mean the state of Wall Street. That means the state of their own pockets and their ability to have a livable existence, right? To have basic needs met. That is the most important thing to every population in the world. And the US is no different. And these sort of ideological wars of freedom, or however they want to frame it, is not working because people can't afford to live. And that's why the American populace is much more concerned with prices, complaining apparently. They're much more concerned with inflation and gas prices, because that will increase inflation, than they are about anything else, than they are about foreign policy, than they are about wars. And what's another interesting thing, I'm sorry to go so long, but just one last point that I want to make. The American populace actually supports the Ukrainians very, very strongly, right? The reaction of the American public is sort of fascinating when you look at the number of wars that the United States itself has started. Why we don't seem to have so many flags or fundraisers or anything for any of the countries that we've decimated, I'm not sure, but we can get into that. I don't know what the reason could possibly be, but while the American public is supportive of Ukraine, it's still not supportive of the US going to war with Russia. And that's a very important differentiation to make. They still don't support, the majority of the public does not support the US going to war with Russia because they are simply aware of the fact that that is going to have major implications that could make things much worse. So if the American public understands this, why don't our officials?
That's the question I've been asking. Are they destroying the world economy on purpose? I don't know. But this has been a great conversation. We had a lot to catch up on, Assal, so it's great to speak to you again. We can do this all night. I want to keep these nightly shows to 90 minutes max. We had a lot to talk about today. So I appreciate you guys for coming on. So anything you wanted to plug, anything you wanted to shout out? Carlos, I'll give you one more last chance on that as well. Any last shout outs you guys have before we sign off?
No, I'd all just support RBN. They do great work. They allow for these kind of conversations. So please don't forget to do that. And yeah, if you're interested in any of my stuff, you can check out the Twitter page and the website.
So any last shout out? Make sure you guys check that article out. And I have both their Twitter links in the description. Make sure you guys follow them on Twitter for more of their political analysis. Assal, anything else?
No, just, I mean, you plugged it yourself, and I second Carlos's point to support RBN and just thank you for creating this platform.
Yeah, it's always fun having these conversations, Assal, and you guys have been hearing a lot, and you guys will see more of Carlos moving forward. This was like the trial run this week, but yeah, four nights in a row, Monday through Thursday, I can guarantee a stream at this time. So let's go for it. And please, if you guys want to support the show so we can continue to produce amazing content, we got a Patreon in the description. Make sure you guys donate to Rome's Tour for the Poor. We got our Kansas City mutual aid event. We're doing a diaper giveaway to help parents in this devastating time because they're paying a ton for food, trying to feed their kids. The least we can do is provide some relief for families here in Kansas City. We're not saving the world, but we got to do the best we can at RBN. And as we grow, like imagine RBN with 100,000 subscribers, what we could do. And I don't know how we get this revolution started, guys. I really have no idea. But let's at least come together as a community and try to make our lives a little bit easier with us having each other's back. So I'm trying the best I can to make the difference I can with the platform and with the political knowledge we have. And I implore you, if you're watching this stream, if you're motivated by what anyone said, please help out with local organizations. And if you can't even do that, just be nicer to your neighbor. If you're a strong man like me, help your neighbor move in or something. Help a lady. Do something to help. That what Rome did. Rome was giving free haircuts. He was mowing lawns of senior citizens in his neighborhood. Like these are small things that we can start to slowly peel back our toxic society with. So that is the last thing I will end you guys with this week. Thank you guys for listening. It's Social Seme. Sign out. Have a great one, guys.